Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast. I'm your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. The Designing Hollywood podcast is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals. Today's guest, an Academy Award-winning costume designer who's been nominated for the Academy Award for Best Costume Design 12 times, winning 4 times, making her the 4th most nominated costume designer ever. Specializing particularly in creating clothing for movies that are out of the ordinary, creating designs that are highly creative, vibrant, standout pieces. Her unforgettable designs range from period costumes to low-key clothing for more character-driven films. Her main objective in designing costumes is to evoke the personalities of the characters, the atmosphere of the period, guide storylines, and make a statement. She excels in this repeatedly, with over 50 movies under her belt. She's known for costumes that are rich in detail, which she adds even when she knows those embellishments might not be visible to audiences. In preparation for a film, she studies what might have been in a character's closet and searches for the right materials. She is exceptionally well at giving attention to details such as material choice, color, line, shape, etc., allowing her costumes to extend on the character and deepening the delivery of information to her audience. Her expertise is evidenced to the movies she's designed for, such as Alice in Wonderland, Snow White and the Huntsman, Edward Scissorhands, Dark Shadows, Chicago, just to name a few of her most popular works. These films display her countless costumes that are highly unique, complicated, theme-appropriate, and eye-catching. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the very multi-talented Colleen Atwood to the Designing Hollywood podcast show. I think to start with, Colleen, I mean, your career is just astonishing, and you continue to work with the same directors, the same people, which you develop relationships, creative relationships with people over your entire career. I guess to start with, how did you find yourself as a costume designer in Hollywood? How did that begin? And I have to say, I did see Firstborn in the theater opening night, which is, according to the IMDb, your first credit as a costume designer. Boy, man, Peter Weller was one scary dude in that movie.
Yeah, he was. He was. That was that was my first feature film. Previous to that, I'd worked in retail and doing other kind of things around clothes in Seattle. And then I moved to New York in 1980 and started, whatever I could do to get a job on any kind of movie. I worked on the film division for Saturday Night Live for a couple seasons. It made separate movies, like when Marty Short and Harry Shearer and Billy and Chris Guest that season.
Right.
It was luckily the best one. And those guys were so specific about what they wanted. It taught me a lot. I learned, I had no money, no time, nothing.
Right.
But it was a really good experience. And I had a lot of different things from each job, spraying on to another job. And then, I guess I finally got my break from Firstborn to get a first feature. And I got in the union in New York with that. And and then I had an opportunity to go up for other jobs there.
Well, what I find really interesting about your career is you, very early on, you started working with some real auteurs. Manhunter, Michael Mann. He's known to be a taskmaster. I don't know what you'd call him, James Toback on The Pickup Artist. Jonathan Demme on things like Married to the Mob. So you really began a career early on with auteurs. And what was that like for you? Because obviously, I think in your own field, you're considered one of the best that has ever existed. And was it tough to start developing relationships with directors? And how do you do that? Like, how do you bring those two, your sensibilities and a director's sensibilities, together and start working with them? What kind of creative process? Where does it begin for you?
Well, I guess with each director, the process is different. What they like, how they like to approach it is very different. With a guy like Jonathan Demme, you just show him a lot of things and ideas, and his energy is so was so positive and so kind of encouraging on all levels. He's really one of the, the first guys that hired black crew. He did a lot of kind of groundbreaking things, and he was a very open, artistic person. So with him, it was more like, look at there's this and that, and like, and you show him, and he'd react to it, generally positively, and even when it wasn't, he kind of was kind.
Mm.
Apted, the first director I worked with, comes from a very different sort of journalistic sort of mentality, and he was very interested in true research about things, like where it came from. So I learned a lot from each one, and my second feature was Manhunter with Michael, and he's a very difficult director to please because he's he has a lot of he has a certain vision of everything that is in his films. But I always feel like no matter what, how hard it was to work with Michael, I have huge respect for him, and I always learn something from him. And I think that's a really exciting dynamic in a director, costume designer relationship, is that you do the clothes, but you also learn things that you can up your game from working with people that are more demanding sometimes than with people that just let it roll. And I have that same kind of relationship with Tim, who I've worked with a lot, and with Rob Marshall. And it's just like you try not to make their job hard by remembering. I always say you have to remember it's not about you. It's about what you're doing. And you have to you have to take that out of the room, the need for it to be you. And sometimes it's sometimes your second choice is actually the right choice and a better choice. And I always say to people, just have something. Plan B is always a good thing to have, no matter what you're doing. But I think in design and with you're dealing with so many dynamics and stuff that sometimes it's a really good thing to kind of take on and not have it be that way. If you have to change something at the last minute or something isn't working, you have a good thing that can fill in the blanks.
In 1990, you did two films. One I actually worked on briefly, which was Joe versus the Volcano, that John Patrick Shanley directed, and then you worked with Tim Burton for the first time on Edward Scissorhands, and I think to this day one of the most iconic costumes, looks for any actor was Johnny Depp as the titular character. When you were working on that with Mr. Burton, how did you begin to? Obviously, he has the soul of an animator, and he came out of doing animation, and the things that he would come up with on his own drawings, and he worked with Rick Heinrichs a lot. What was that like, beginning a relationship with him and coming up with something like the final look of Edward Scissorhands? I mean, to this day, what a design. I think everyone knows that look around the world. If you showed someone a silhouette of what that character looked like, everyone would know it was Edward Scissorhands.
Well, I think with Edward, that was an early creation of Tim's. It came from a drawing of his that's very not dissimilar. The details aren't all there, the costume and all that, but the silhouette is there, the scissors are there, and it was a real collaboration between myself and the guys at Stan Winston, who did the hands, to get the costume to work. And I was doing that costume. It was shot in Florida, which was hideous for Johnny. It was so hot and humid. I mean, literally his makeup was floating off his face. It was so hot. And I had a real struggle in the beginning because there, at that point in history, there weren't stretch leathers or a lot of things that we have now in the stretch world with materials. And I was making it out of leather, but I kept trying to explain to the guys that I could have pieces of stretch so the leather wouldn't like stretch out and just bag. And it took me finally this really old tailor that was at Western Costume at the time, who'd done ballet in Russia, understood what I was talking about, because I was dealing with people whose mindset was something else. but because he'd done dance, he understood what I needed, and he cracked it for me. And from that point on, like, just moved forward and got it done. The thing that's amazing about that now, as I do these bigger movies and all this stuff, is on Edward Scissorhands, we had 2 costumes for the whole movie. Which now,
Oh.
if you did a movie like that now, you'd have like 10 versions of it, blah blah blah, with visual effects and all that. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I read an interview with you in Style magazine that you only had enough budget to do 2 costumes.
Yeah.
And I mean, now what's happened since then? We have technology like 3D printing and things that you can avail yourselves of now. How has, like you just said, when you have to come up with 10, has new technologies made your job easier?
Well, it's made making things function in a way easier. It's made things for movement and action and that kind of stuff much easier with laser printing and all the great, things you can do with a really basic fabric. You can make your own fabric. So it's quite, it was quite groundbreaking when it first started happening. And it just gets better and better, I think. But it's also fun to walk away from it sometimes, not when you're doing an action movie, but doing other stuff and not use it at all. I use it both ways. You can also make beautiful period prints with it, and it has endless potentialities. I just finished a movie called Little Mermaid, where I used it in a different way to create all kinds of scales that we then screened on and did stuff with. So it's an exciting kind of prospect, but it's made some things easier, because if you have a vision, you can accomplish it maybe in a way that you couldn't previously.
I can't wait to see what Ursula the Sea Witch looks like in live action. I'm very
She's
excited.
Gonna be great. It's Melissa McCarthy, can't go wrong.
I can't
right?
wait. I mean, when I heard that casting, I'm like, come on.
She's awesome. It's going to be exciting.
Now, one of the things I just love about where you in the 90s, you sort of moved into a lot of fantasy film. And as a science fiction, fantasy, horror fan myself, I mean, everything from Gattaca to Fallen, Sleepy Hollow, the Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes, and even Ed Wood, which is, I think, one of the great movies ever made about Hollywood. How do you begin a process? I mean, you might be working for Lawrence Kasdan on a Western like Wyatt Earp, or you suddenly have to go to the Planet of the Apes. How do you begin designing for a film? Is it the script? Is it the director? Are there production images? What inspires you, and how do you start the design process?
Well, the first step's reading the screenplay and sort of digesting that, and then sometimes when you read stuff, you see certain things that in your mind, and then you start doing research about of if it's, say, Wyatt Earp or Gattaca, like things that are sort of related to the story, and then you have a meeting with the director and show him your vision of what you're doing. They weigh in on what they see, and nowadays they might have a deck or something like that you're looking at, but back then it was mainly just boards of stuff and images. And then as that progresses, you start doing in some cases sketches, in some cases, for me, not. I just start a muslin and start making stuff, because I think it's a more direct path in some ways at that time in history. And with Larry and with Tim both, there's a lot of respect for the designers, and they'll have their notes, and you just kind of show them stuff as it goes along, and the designs kind of come into play. Usually the first meeting I have with an actor, I show them everything I have in mind for the whole movie, not just their part, just so they know the world their character is going to be living in. So it can kind of give them a feeling for the whole thing, because even on some of the stuff I've been doing now, like some of the people that come in for small parts don't even get the whole screenplay. So at least they know who they are, where they are, what they're, they'll know what they're doing and stuff. But it gives them more of a vibe for it, and I think it's helpful. And some actors don't even look at it; they're just like, okay, yeah, this is my, they're just more in their own head of who their guy is.
Well, I mean, I just look at your credits, and the just design work that you've done has been so exquisite. And I wonder, have you ever pushed back and decided, no, I've got an idea that might be different than what you've seen, and you've gone down a path, and you had to convince one of these directors that already trusts you that no, I think we should go this way. And was there anything that you've ever designed that was not necessarily at first what you thought or what they thought, and you came up with something that surprised everyone?
Um, Probably. I don't remember a specific thing that I've done that way, but sometimes I start a design, and as it progresses, it evolves.
Mm.
Um, on the stand, and you go, oh, this could be this, and go, oh, we can use this for armor or something like that, like in some of the Huntsman stuff, and so things evolve as you actually put them together. You're inspired by that, and so they may start in being purpose built for one thing, and suddenly you realize they're better for something else, so you just change it over to that. But I've never really had like a real pushback, kind of like, this is not, it can't be this, it has to be that. I mean, I've had rejection, believe me, but I haven't specifically had that sort of experience.
Have you allowed, or do actors, like maybe you haven't met an actor yet, when you first meet them, or maybe do fittings or taking measurements, have actors influenced your design work after you've met them so you could help bring out their personalities or play to their strengths?
Yeah, because it's a collaborative process. I mean, sometimes with actors, I just start with real pieces, put a coat on them, see how that shape looks, and it's by shapes, and so creating a silhouette first, and then you go in and figure out the textures and the nuances of it, and have fun with them, have a play with them, and see what feels good for them. And actors are really interesting. Some actors like put on something and look at it far away in the mirror, and then go up closer and look at it, and some of them um, don't look in the mirror at all. So it's a very interesting, their process is very interesting to watch sometimes, because sometimes, and I find it with musicians too a little bit, is if people feel a costume, they don't have to see it. If they feel it, they look at it, they feel it, and it feels right on them intuitively, then it, the journey begins.
Right. Is that, to feel that costume, does that have to do with the fabrics? I mean, what is, like, what is most important when you're, like you said on Edward Scissorhands, you didn't have stretchable leathers or that kind of thing.
Right.
How important are the textiles, the actual fabrics that you're using, in terms of helping an actor develop their persona, and then you to be able to design what you need to design?
Well, I think the fabrics are the basis of the design, and you have to find fabrics that work for the movement or the shapes that you want to create. I mean, sometimes you have to give actors something that's restrictive and not comfortable, because they want to stand a certain way or walk a certain way, and sometimes they want it, it needs to move and be fluid. So I'd say that the fabric definitely is chosen always to help sell the silhouette and the sort of meaning of it, and then secondly chosen for what the camera, for lighting and things like that.
Now, I've heard that you've taken assistants around the planet looking for vintage clothing, period costumes. Is there an Indiana Jones quality to that? I know now you're working on, like, Masters of the Air, the third series that's going to, after Band of Brothers in the Pacific, that Tom Hanks is producing about World War II. Is that a hard process, and what does that entail? Have you ever had to go all around the world looking for a specific fabric to get exactly what you needed?
Well, in today's world, the a lot of things come to you, like you can find certain things, but I have, for Masters of the Air, I started way up front, because we had to manufacture the pilots' flight suits and things like that, which are not just hanging on a collector's rail to buy.
Right.
So I had worked on that with vendors, and now I'm deep into the civilian side of it. Um, and we're sourcing all over the world for every piece of rental clothing I can get, because it's so gigantic. It's faster than anything I've ever done. So in that sense, it's you're. I mean, at this point in history, we kind of got a kibosh on hopping on a plane and going to Rome for
Right.
4 hours and pulling. It's not the party we're at right now.
Right.
So I have a lot of relationships with the costume houses around the world. And because I've been to them so many times, I kind of know their stock. I know one place is good for one thing, one place is good for another. And there's always new resources and stuff. When I did Dumbo with Tim, I did go to India for fabric for the circus stuff, because I made so many costumes for that movie. We probably manufactured over 2,000 pieces for that movie by the time
Incredible
we got done
pieces too.
and we couldn't find them in rental houses. They just weren't there. They were, the ones that were there that were great wouldn't fit anybody that we had, and so it became a huge manufacturing thing. So my assistants did go to India with me, because we went from London to Delhi for 2.5 days. It's not like it's a glamorous shopping trip with, we have a couple good dinners in the mix, but it's pretty like to accomplish 2 full days in Delhi is not easy. I
Right.
had somebody with me that was Indian who was very helpful, but that sort of side of it is exciting. And then the sadly less flea markets, less availability of older things in general. So it's becoming a journey that's a little bit different than it was even 10 years ago.
Right. I wanted to ask you. I'm rushing through all of my questions. I have so many. Fantastic Beasts, which took home an Oscar for the film. I thought a beautifully designed film, and there's a lot of specific colors in movies like that, and yet sometimes there's just a palette that you create. How do you work with color, and is color something that comes out of the natural design experience, or do you work with, say, a director of photography working on the color palette of what your costumes will look like?
Well, a movie like Beast is, you're creating a world, and you're creating worlds stacked on top of each other. And one of the ways I find to control it on a certain level is with color. So for a certain things, I use certain colors, or I sort of gravitate towards certain colors. And then I mix it up sometimes, because it's a movie that flows. So within the flow of it, the color can flow through the movie. It can be used again and again. You can't just have everybody in red and this
Right.
scene everybody in green. But the colors are somehow kind of married through the film. And it's almost like, for me at this point, intuitively done. And I'm, very involved with crowd fittings and what they look like, and every detail of that part, which is getting harder because of COVID, and it's a bit of a different process. But I do like to control it, because it's not only the color, it's just the whole mood of the people that are around the principals. It's the world they're in.
I think about Newt Scamander's blue jacket in that film. That jacket was throughout the movie. And again, coming up with that kind of a color, do you have to test that color? Are there tests that you do before you even decide to manufacture a piece?
Well, it was a real choice. I mean, it took a minute, because I really liked it, and I liked that it was he was like a bird to me in a way, Newt. So I wanted sort of the color of his waistcoat to be what it was, and the sort of texture of the trousers and the coat. And I really wanted his coat to look like everyone else's coat, but be not quite the same. So it was close enough to navy blue, close enough to green, but still it was its own kind of peacock blue color. And it had a wonderful kind of texture to it, the fabric that I found. So it was, it came about that way. But it was debated at first, because they were like, coming from the Potter thing and stuff, we all wanted to, make a different world that was united with it, but its own world.
Sure.
And there's so much black in the coats of men in history that it was kind of stepping outside the what you'd think a magical kind of
Sure.
person would have.
Now, what about hats? The hats played a part in the film. Do you also design hats?
Well, I don't make hats, but I have a hat maker that I work with who's really good. And I give her images that I kind of like, and then she sort of has a play, and then we bounce back and forth. So for those movies especially, her name is Sophie, and she's an amazing hat milliner. And for other films, I've collaborated with hat dealers, given them a hat that they copy. There's a guy in Chicago I love, with a company called Optimo that makes really beautiful fedoras and that kind of elegant men's hats. And then there's an Italian place that's just crazy called Peroni in Rome that I love. So I have sources all over the world, and I'm always finding new ones. So it's a fun thing.
Well, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I guess to sort of wrap up our conversation, there's a lot of people that I think are interested in getting into the business. And what kind of maybe advice could you offer anyone that wants to pursue a career in costume design, and how do they begin? What do you do?
Well, I think, the first thing I always say to people is, if you can get a job, even if it's not exactly the job you want or in the department you want, but it's related, that you should take it, because that's how you meet people, and you have to be ready to work super hard, and it's interesting because some people come from great privilege and come in and just think it's going to be so glamorous to be in costume, and they spend a week there and they're like, oh my God, this is so different than what I thought. I'm not sure it's what I want.
Right.
So it's really good, even if you end up maybe working for the art department or something that's creative, that you kind of see what everybody does, and it gives you a better idea, in a sense, of what you might like to do.
Are there, looking back at your whole career, I just look at this list of credits of yours, and it's just astonishing to me. What are some of your standout creations? What are some of the things that you would point to and say, okay, this is me. This is, if someone wants to know what my design sensibility is, are there costumes that you could point to and say, these are them? These are the things I'm most proud of.
I love, I guess, well, I love Charlize's stuff from the Huntsman series. It's just like so out of control.
Right.
Her and when we did it with Emily Blunt and Jessica, that was just like a design person party. And then I love Eddie's first costume for Beast a lot. It feels like we got together, Eddie with his movement and everything, to create a real character. Johnny in Alice in Wonderland, and also in Ed Wood. So I think that the sort of concept that Tim came up with Alice shrinking and growing, but her dresses changing, was a really beautiful challenge for me, and something that that was a really nice thing to get to do.
I mean, I look at your career, it's so diverse, everything that you've done. Is there something that you haven't been able to do that you've really wanted to do? Maybe tackle a certain period or a certain subject matter?
I think I could plug into just about anything. You learn to embrace what the world you're in. I never really thought I'd do a war movie, and I'm loving it. I just love all the guys are so great, and the sort of the worlds that we're creating and the story that you're telling. So I think if the script's really good and the story's really good, there's tons of things I love to do. I'd love to do 1860s again. I've never done anything Elizabethan. That seems to be the English designers corner of the room. So as an American, But anyway, and sometimes I like to clean it up and just do. I had a great time doing Bombshell with Jay Roach and the girls. I mean, it was great working, doing that kind of movie, bare bones, low budget, and just amazing cast.
Oh,
So
I really like that movie quite a bit. I mean,
yeah,
it was a great film.
it was a great experience. And as you grow as a designer, I mean, sometimes the experience is as important as the design and what
Now,
you're doing.
the last thing I'd ask you is, because you brought up Little Mermaid earlier. I mean, to me, I think the Little Mermaid was really where Disney reemerged with their animation, and it became. I mean, that film is so iconic as an animated film, and I just thought to myself, how are they going to do that? You've got Ariel and, of course, Ursula the Sea Witch. And when they cast Melissa McCarthy, I'm like, okay, well now. Is there anything that we can look forward to in Little Mermaid that maybe, besides Ursula the Sea Witch, which I brought up, I mean, Ariel herself, and was that a challenge? I mean, going under the sea, as they say?
Well, it was interesting, and it was interesting for me in the fact that because we were working with a lot of visual effects, that I created like the costumes that were never made, that were just for the fish people and for different people. So it was really fun for me to do that. And then we also had a really amazing couple weeks where we worked with the Albanese dancers, because they choreographed one of the numbers, and there'll be plants in the movie, but we gave them costumes like a festival. So, there's some wonderful things in the movie. I think Rob and John's hands, it will be so much more than anybody can imagine it'll be. And, with visual effects being what they are, and the Halle Berry, Halle Bailey, that's
Right.
the Little Mermaid, is got an amazing, beautiful, like tears to your eyes kind of voice, beautiful voice. So it's going to be quite exciting. It won't shrimp on anything. I don't think it'll disappoint people.
I'm actually, as a middle-aged man, I'm very excited to see this movie simply because of the design work. Well, listen.
I'm wondering what Frederick Douglass is doing on your mic.
Oh, I'm a huge. Well, I do a lot of speaking on YouTube and shows. He's one of my favorite orators, one of my favorite American statesmen. So
yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his. Well, Colleen Atwood, I want to thank you so much for giving us your time. Can people follow you on social media? Do you have an Instagram page?
I do. I don't know if it's called I don't know what it's called, but I have two. But
well, people can find you.
I suck.
But you are. You're on Instagram. Well, listen, I
am occasionally.
I really want to thank you for being on the Designing Hollywood podcast. I know you didn't have a lot of time today, but I can't thank you enough for participating in this conversation. And I can't wait to see Masters of the Air. Cannot wait.
Yeah, it's going to be great. All right. I can't wait to be done with it in about 5 months.
Well, thank you so much. I very much
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. The Designing Hollywood podcast would like to thank our sponsor, the Western Costume Company, a one-stop shop for costume designers, costumers, and stylists. Since the early days of Hollywood over a century ago, Western costume has been an important industry mainstay. Western costume has got you covered. Thank you to our guest, costume designer Colleen Atwood. The producer and founder of the Designing Hollywood podcast is Martika Ibarra, and co-founder, costume designer Marilyn Vance. Follow me, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, on Twitter at BurnettRM, on Instagram at Robert Meyer Burnett, and on my own YouTube channel, The Burnett Work. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. Until next time.